Yeah, okay, here it is.
We go. Okay, great. Great.
Webinar's being recorded, webinar started. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so you're all
Okay.
set with what you're
I
doing?
think we are set, and I think I can screen share from here. Yes.
You got
Okay.
the big screen? Okay.
Great. I think we worked it out.
Let me just do a quick intro.
Yes, go ahead.
Good evening.
So, yeah.
It's fine. I was like texting. Oh, people are saying.
I think, are we getting on?
Good evening, everyone. We apologize for the technical difficulties, but that's what happens when you try to do Zoom, apparently. So welcome, thank you for coming to our UN Holocaust Remembrance Day event. The day is actually tomorrow, but we opted for today. My name is Mary Lou Weyerbeck. I serve on the board of the Permanent Chair of Polish Culture, and I served on the board of the Holocaust Resource Center in years past. So we've been doing this program at Canisius either with Dr. Jones or through the Permanent Chair of Polish Culture for a number of years. And this year, we're happy to have with us the Times best-selling author, Sharon Cameron, who comes to us from Nashville, Tennessee. So she has written numerous books: The Dark Unwinding, A Spark Unseen, Rook, The Forgetting, The Knowing, this book that she'll be presenting on today, The Light in Hidden Places, and Bluebird, and another one on the way in November. This is all through Scholastic Press. Her books have won the Parents' Choice Gold Award, the Westchester Fiction Award. She earned starred reviews from numerous places and is on many lists as the best fiction for young adults in particular. So we are happy to have her with us this evening. She presented at Park School earlier and will be presenting at Canisius High School. For all of those of you out on Zoom, you're missing the nice reception that we have. But we're glad we're finally on. And without further ado, I introduce you Sharon Cameron.
Thank you so much. I am really, really thrilled and actually just honored to be here to share what is a very, very important subject to me. So let me get this screen shared. We'll get this technological part over. Goodness knows that this has been an interesting thing. Of course, it's not there what I need to share. So I may have you come out because we were trying to make this work earlier. So I'm glad we've got that. So if I maybe you can help me get back to the desktop on that.
Yeah, we'll get back to the desktop.
Thanks for your patience, everybody. You can see it.
There we go.
Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, then we're gonna go to the Zoom. That should
Yeah,
full size.
slideshow. I'm making.
Okay.
Okay. I think we're going.
Are you on the Zoom?
Is
You gotta
the
be-
Zoom
you
still
gotta be-
going?
You gotta be in the Zoom.
Okay. Okay.
Get back up. You gotta
It's
go
been such
Zoom.
an interesting. Remember.
There you go.
All right.
And we're gonna go to right there. Slideshow.
All right.
Okay.
I think we did it. Wow. It's easy until it isn't, right? Someday Zoom will figure out how to let you full screen before you actually have to get on Zoom. But like I said, thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share before Holocaust Remembrance Day. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me before we get going. I am not one of those people who always thought they were going to be an author. I was not one of those kids who dreamed of writing books, not at all. I was a very avid reader growing up, but my life was all about music. And I was actually a classical pianist for a good 23, 24 years before I started writing full time. And I still love music. I still play. And I thought my life would be that forever. Was happy with how my life was. I thought that's how it was going to be. But I was also a very avid student of history. And this is just me being my own student. But when I say a student, I mean things like getting obsessed with a little piece of history from Scotland, and this is pre-Google days. So you go to interlibrary loan and you get documents sent in and you research and you do all these things. I loved all of that stuff. And I got very, very obsessed with this little piece of little known history. I actually traveled, I went and met descendants. And one fateful day, I had a free 45 minutes. That didn't happen all that often. I had kids, but I had a free 45 minutes and I walked past my computer and I thought, what would that be like? What would it be like to write a first chapter about this little piece of history that has meant so much to me? And so I sat down. And I'm not exaggerating in any way when I say that when I got up after 45 minutes, I had decided to completely change my life. I absolutely fell in love with creating story. And I kept my job, my husband, and my children, but everything else went by the wayside. I started writing every single day. I dropped all of my other activities. I found other people who wanted to write. I found a critique group. I found professional organizations. I started learning about the craft, the business. I did all the things. And 4 years later, I had a novel. That novel didn't sell, but the next one did. And so now working on, number 8, I guess you can kind of see how when I end up standing in these places, I'm still a little bit surprised about it. I'm still surprised that this is where I ended up, but now I wouldn't be anywhere else because I followed my passion. So rewind back to the early 90s, long before I had ever thought I would do any other thing than music, long before I had ever once considered being a writer or actually written one unassigned word. And I did another small thing. Sitting down in front of that computer that day was really a whim. It was a small thing. It wasn't a big decision. I did another small thing that actually turned into a big decision. I walked through my living room and turned on my television. I just thought I needed some background noise. But there was a woman on my TV screen. It was this woman. And she said 5 words that I didn't know it at the time, but they completely changed my life. And those 5 words were, "My name is Stefania Podgorska." Stefania Podgorska on my TV screen started telling me about her life. She told me about being a 13-year-old Polish Catholic girl living on a small farm in a very backwater area of Poland, very rural. She had lots of brothers and sisters. There were chickens, there were horses, and she kind of hated all of it. It was not her scene at all. Stefania wanted to be in the city. She wanted to be where things were happening, where it was all going on. She was a mover and a shaker. That was kind of her personality. And so at 13 years old, She convinced her mother. I'm pretty sure my mother could not have been convinced of this, but Stefania managed to convince her mother to let her leave school and to go live with one of her older sisters in the big city of Przemyśl. Now, this is a map of Poland, the way it looked before the invasion of Germany, and you can see Przemyśl down there and towards the bottom. Przemyśl was actually not a very large town, but it was large to Stefania. It was kind of everything to her, actually. So she went to the city and she ended up working for a family called the Diamonds. And the Diamonds were a Jewish family that owned a grocery store, the kind of little place where you would go to buy your newspapers or your an apple, some bread, that kind of thing, little things. And, I think Mrs. Diamond had been a lonely woman. She had 4 sons and a daughter. Her daughter had been gone for quite some time. You can see the daughter there in the middle. Mr. and Mrs. Diamond are on the upper right of the screen. And I think she was lonely. And I think Stefania Podgorska brought a lot of sunshine into her life. She was energetic and she danced and she sang. And Stefania loved working in this grocery store. She loved it. She thought she was doing the stuff. She was an adult. And she told a story of one day when she had not been working for the Diamond family for very long, that Mrs. Diamond sent her to the market to make some purchases for the store, for the market square. And when she got there, there were 2 little boys having a fight in the street. They were going at each other, and the fight had started because one boy called the other boy a dirty Jew. And the crowd that had gathered around this fight in the street picked up the words and they said, dirty Jew, dirty Jew. And Stefania left the square. She went back to the Diamond store. She locked herself in the bathroom. And she stood and she looked at herself in the mirror. And in watching her on the TV tell the story, and she touched her face and she said, I touched the skin on my face. I touched the skin on my hands, on my arms. And right then, Stefania Podgorska at 13 made a decision. It was a small decision. And that decision was that her skin was no different than any other skin. That there was no difference between Catholic skin and Jewish skin. Now, I should probably say that being with the Diamonds was not necessarily the most usual situation in the city of Przemyśl. Przemyśl was a city fairly evenly divided between Jewish and Catholic. They did business together, but they did not, they got along fairly peaceably, really, but they did not socialize much. So eventually Stefania moved in with the Diamond family. It kind of became their sister. Like I said, there were 4 sons. This is the second son, Max Diamond, and he is standing in front of the grocery store. You can see the advertisements and the things that they would sell. And, so she was kind of bucking the system, really. She was always bucking the system. I learned about Stefania Podgorska, but she became really part of their family. She became the sister that they no longer had. They became the parents that she did not see much anymore. And they were really a family. And then came 1939, and Hitler invaded Poland, and bombs started dropping on Przemyśl. And it was a very obviously a very frightening time, a time of a lot of change. The Russians and the Germans were clashing in the city of Shemesh even early in 1939, early 1940, because the River San, which ran through the middle of the city, was really the demarcation line between the two armies. And for a long time, the Russians took over, the Germans took over. It was back and forth, back and forth. And then for quite a long time, the city became divided. So one side of the river was German, the other side of the river was Russian. And Stefania and the Diamonds were on the Russian side. And it stayed that way for about a year and a half. They lived under Russian rule, and for them, not much changed, except that all the Jews from the German side were expelled and sent to their side. This is the Jews of Shemesh coming across the railroad bridge that goes across the river. And so it was crowded, but that was really the biggest change for them for a long time, until the German push came and the Germans took the entire city. And we all know what happens at that point. This is the last synagogue of Shemesh burning. So the Jews were rounded up. They were put into ghettos. And Stefania did her best to assist them. She was crawling under the fences. She was stealing food. She was smuggling food to help keep them from starving. But there is only so much that one 16-year-old girl can do. And so the dates that you see underneath these pictures are the years of death for the Diamant family. And Stefania, because she is Catholic, is of course left alone. And now she is alone in the old Diamant apartment, living on her own in a Nazi-occupied city. And then Stefania discovers that not only were the Diamants taken, but that her mother and brother have also been taken by the Germans for slave labor in Germany. And that has left her youngest sister alone with a neighbor who is not much of a parent. So Stefania walks 30 miles on foot through the country, and she goes and gets her sister Helena, and she brings Helena back to Shemesh. And now we have these two girls, 16 years old, 6 years old, living alone, no parents, no money, no job, in a Nazi-occupied city. And that was when, at midnight, there came a knock on the door. And on the other side of the door was Max Diamant. And this is Max's identification card that identifies him as a Jew. And you can see the swastika on the bottom. Max, when she opened that door, was broken. He was bloody. He was wounded in the chest because he had just jumped from a moving train that was taking him to a death camp. And he thought he was going to commit suicide. That's what he was trying to do. But it didn't work. He lived. He had nowhere to go. He was hurt. He needed to heal. And he went to the only place he knew. And that was Stefania Podgorska. And he said, please, please hide me. Now, Stefania and Helena, even at her age, they knew exactly what happened to people who aided and assisted Jews in Shemesh. Because the family just 2 blocks up the street had been executed just the month before for hiding Jews. They knew what it meant. And they knew what their decision meant. And both Stefania and Helena said, yes, we will hide you. And then they hid the only other surviving Diamant brother, Hennig, and then Hennig's fiance, and then the next one, and the next one, until there was no room in the apartment. And Stefania needed a new place to hide these people. And she found a little house on Tatarska Street, a house that had an attic in the top where a false wall could be built. And so everyone moved across town to this little house. The wall was built. And before she knew it, there were 13 Jewish men, women, and children hiding in her attic. And at this point, we have a 17-year-old girl and a 7-year-old girl. Those are the two ration cards that are supposed to feed 15 people. But they made it work. And then came another knock on the door. This time, on the other side of the door, it was two SS officers. And they said, "We are requisitioning your house for staff quarters for the new German hospital that's being put in across the street. You have 2 hours to leave, or you will be shot." Stefania and Helena both knew that if they left, the 13 Jews in the attic were either going to be discovered and killed, or they were going to starve. And the 13 in the attic said to her, "Run. Stefania, run, take your sister, save your sister. You have done everything that you could possibly do." And Stefania and Helena together said, "No, we will not run, and we will not leave you." 2 hours later came the knock on the door. Stefania opened the door, and the German officer on the other side said, "Oh, you're still here. Well, actually, we've housed everyone except the last 4. We can put those in one bedroom. So we'll take this bedroom. You can have the other bedroom and you can stay." So the Nazis moved into Stefania's house. And now she had 4 Nazis living in a bedroom that was directly below an attic that hid 13 Jewish men, women, and children. And the only people to stand between were these 2 girls. And what came next was one of the most amazing stories of bravery, of sacrifice, of humanity and love that I had ever heard. And I sat on my couch, riveted. I couldn't look away. Because I wanted to believe that if I was ever challenged in the way that this teenage girl had been challenged, that I could do half of what she did. Stefania Podgorska absolutely changed my life that day. She became my hero. And I never forgot her story. Not for 20-ish years. So fast forward. Now I've changed careers. I have 5 published books. I have things like Google. And I've never stopped thinking of Stefania Podgorska. And I decided I'm going to go find Stefania. I'm going to find out what happened. And so I started doing my research. I started digging like I have always been wanting to do. And I found her. I found out that Stefania had married the first man she saved, Max Demont, and that they had a child, Ed Brzezinski. They changed their name to Brzezinski not long after the war. Anti-Semitism in Poland was a continuing problem. There were many people who felt that they needed to continue what Hitler had begun. So they changed their names. They eventually immigrated to Israel for a short time, maybe 6, 7 years, and then on to Boston, eventually to Los Angeles. So I reached out to Ed and said, "Hi, I really like your mom. Could I write a book about her?" So we talked about this possibility, of writing a book about his mom. I flew out to Los Angeles to see him and to meet with him, and he shared memories with me and stories with me, family pictures, videos, his mom's unpublished memoir. And then he said to me, "Well, would you like to go meet my mom?" And I said, "Yeah, I really, really would. Yeah." And so I got to meet Stefania Podgorska. Now, Stefania was in the last year of her life at this point. She had dementia. And, for her, I don't think this is often said, but dementia was a bit of a blessing. She did suffer in her life from PTSD, from the incredible levels of fear that she lived in, and all of that went away. All that trauma went away, and she became like a little girl again. And Ed said it was really actually kind of wonderful. So she has no idea that she met me, but I will never, ever forget meeting her. Because how many times does it happen in your life that you get to sit at the feet of your hero? And then we went to buy her a new pair of pajamas, and I thought, this is just the strange place my life has taken me. But now I'm going to help buy her pajamas. Stefania passed away in 2018 while I was working on this book. I got to help write her obituary. I got to speak at her funeral. It was an incredible privilege. And 3 weeks after her funeral, Ed and my husband and I, we all got on a plane and we went to Poland to rediscover her life. So we went to Przemyśl, and this is what Przemyśl looks like today. It's a really quite lovely town. It's a small town, lots of cathedrals. We went to the archives, looking at maps, trying to find addresses, directories, so we could find the Diamant's apartment, so we could find the grocery store, so we could find the German tool factory, where Stefania worked for a while to make money to feed everyone. And we went to Tatarska Street. This is Tatarska. The front of the building that you see is where a different family lived, including for a while a Nazi officer. The back part of the building behind the water pump, that is the place where Stefania and everyone else lived, including 4 Nazis and 13 hidden Jews. And the little dark window that you can see at the top is actually the window that looked in on the hidden attic space. This is a picture of Stefania Podgorska and the attic, pretty much as it looked. This was taken in the 1980s. And you can see by the cameraman, which is actually Ed back there, there's sort of a vertical line going up that wall. That was where the false wall came across. So that was the space behind, and you can see the little window like I showed you in the other picture. That was the space where 13 people were. Here's what it looks like. This space was not big enough to stand up in. It was not big enough for 13 people. They actually had to lay on their sides, sort of almost stacked across the floor like sardines. And if one person needed to turn, the other had to turn. They all had to be in the same direction or they didn't fit. And in the attic, there had to be absolute silence. No movement, not a cough, not a sneeze, not a snore, any movement or noise could mean discovery or death because those floors were not thick. The Nazis were just a board's thickness away, right below them. We went to the ghetto of Shemesh. This would have been the entrance to the ghetto. There would have been concrete and barbed wire across this area. This is where, if you read the book, this is where Helena would bounce her ball and pass notes to Max. This is where Helena Podgorska bit the leg of a Nazi, one of her finest moments. And this was the house in the ghetto where the Diamants were housed. And the basement, when you see that little basement window down below us, that is where they hid during the first deportation to try to avoid being taken on the trains. And that is where Max Diamant witnessed babies being killed. And this is now a memorial, but this is the wall where the last 1,500 Jewish women and children who could not be fit on the trains were shot. We even went out into the countryside and found the curve in the railroad tracks where Max Diamant jumped from a moving train. And this is Ed walking down the tracks where his father jumped, trying to die. We got to meet with survivors of the attic. Stefania is here on one side, the brunette on the other. That is Jusha. She was 11 years old or so when she was hidden in the attic. And we went to her home in Belgium, and she described what it was like to live as a child in a place where you couldn't move and you couldn't make noise. She described what it felt like to have to lie still while the rats ran back and forth across their bodies. And I got to go see Helena. Helena stayed in Poland. She became a doctor. She remained in Poland for the rest of her life. She invited me to her house, and she lays quite a table, as you can see. And she shared her memories with me. This was a very difficult and painful thing for her to do. And I think it's something she only did 2 or 3 times in her life. I'll be forever, ever grateful. You know, I said, who gets to sit at the feet of their heroes? It happened to me twice. Because I got to meet Helena. Helena passed away on December 5th this past year. So we're all still mourning her. But she was an amazing, amazing person at 6 and 7 years old. She became more amazing as she grew. So I came back from this trip to Poland ready to write the book that would become Light in Hidden Places. But I didn't write the book that I thought I was going to write. Before I went to Poland, I thought that what I wanted to do was to share what my heroes, Stefania Podgorska and Helena Podgorska, had done, the sacrifices that they had made. I wanted everybody to know about their bravery and the strength of will that they showed. I wanted everyone to know. But when I went to Auschwitz, as part of our trip to Poland, we all went together. I had never been to a concentration camp. And part of that tour, I'm sure some of you have done this if you have been there, part of that tour is that they take you in a small group and they take you through the changing room where everyone would disrobe, and they take you into the shower room which is actually a gas chamber. And they have you stand in the gas chamber in silence for about the length of time that it would take someone to die. And I was standing in this horrible space. It is dark, it is dank, the walls are stained, and frankly, it stinks. And I think it will always stink in that room. Absolutely the most horrible place I have ever stood. And I walked out of there. And I knew I had to write a different book. I've always considered myself a student of history. And the Holocaust is something that I had taken it upon myself to find out about long before I had ever thought about writing about it. I'd read the translations of Hitler's speeches, watched those films, listened to hours upon hours of oral histories of survivors. It's the stuff that I wanted to know. I knew what happened in the camps. I knew what happened in the Holocaust. I stepped out of the gas chambers of Auschwitz and I realized I knew nothing about the Holocaust. Nothing. I knew facts, I knew figures, but I had not felt it. Not the way I really needed to feel it. And that's why I think that books like The Light in Hidden Places are so important. Because when I first started to write this book, I thought I want everyone to know about this experience. I left Poland and realized, no, I need everyone to feel this experience. Because when you feel that, you're never going to forget it. The facts will fade. They will go away. That feeling is never going to go away. And so suddenly, I wanted to write a book that helped people feel the fear, the determination, the courage, every life and death decision that Stefania Podgorska had to make. This is a picture of Stefania and Helena taken right after the war. And here's why I think that we need to feel their story. Because these two girls, they made a choice. These two girls at 16 and 6 chose humanity over hate, and they chose to do something about it. And that seems like a really big choice. But I don't actually think that that was the choice. The real choice happened, not when she said yes to hiding all of the people, not when she said yes to Max, not when she said she wouldn't run. The real choice happened when Stefania Podgorska at 13 years old looked at her skin and decided that skin was only skin. That was the decision that changed everything. And it changed the world. That small choice changed the world. It changed the world for 13 people in that attic and for all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that now walk the earth because of what she did. Her choice mattered. It changed everything. And the challenge that I feel, and that I hope that everyone else feels when they read this book, is that if the small choices of a young, uneducated Polish girl from a backwater city who no one would consider to be important, if her choices can change the world, then don't ours have that exact same potential? I say they do. They do have that potential. So I think that is the challenge that I feel. I think that is the challenge that I want to present to you if you read this book. I would like for you to feel this young woman's experience, to never forget it, and then to decide what is it that I can do, that you can do to stand up against hate. What are the small choices that will change everything? And I hope you are all challenged to go out and make them, because I think that's what our world needs. So thank you very much for listening to me. I forgot to say that you want to do questions. I forgot to say that at the beginning, to be thinking of questions. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free. Yes.
Yeah, just something which came to me as you were speaking, a bit of the history. First of all, thank you for that enlightening talk, really challenging. But in 1939, Poland had two invaders,
Yeah.
Germany. It
Yeah.
was an ally of Nazi Germany called Soviet Union. And
That's right.
both countries invaded Poland.
Right.
You said only Germany invaded, that's incorrect. Both countries invaded Poland and destroyed the country completely as allies.
Yes, and for the Zoom people, he's absolutely making the point that that Poland was invaded by both Germany and Russia, and was destroyed equally, I would say, yeah, by the two of them, and that was absolutely the case, and that is absolutely the case in the book, and that battle line that happened to fall right in Przemyśl is what affected their lives so much. Have any other questions? Yes.
The Nazis moved into that room. I'll read it in the book, but I'd like to know it ahead of time. How did they balance, and how much of a period of time was it before the war was over?
The question is, even though it's a bit of a spoiler, which is okay, the question is, when the Nazis moved in to the house, how long of a period of time was that, and how did they manage this? How did they get away with it? How did they balance their lives with all of these people living in the same house? And that is a question that I could answer very short or very, very long. I'll say this, that the period of time was about 9 months. The Nazis lived in the bedroom below. There were times that they were gone to work. These were nurses two of them were nurses who were working in the hospital across the street. They both had SS officer boyfriends who came and stayed with them. So that's who was in the bedroom. And they were gone sometimes. So they would take those moments to do things. It was Helena's job to go up and down the ladder and empty the waste bucket from the attic. That was the time when food could be snuck up. They had to have all kinds of shenanigans to bring enough food into the house without arousing suspicion. And these were the times that would happen. If nobody left, people couldn't eat. The waste bucket couldn't get dumped. It also couldn't be allowed to overflow. They were sweltering up there in the summer, and they were absolutely freezing. in the winter. People got sick. It was absolutely harrowing. And I think that had it lasted much longer, I don't think anyone would have survived. They were on the edge. And they should have honestly been caught dozens of times. It is absolutely incredible that they weren't. Yes.
Why did they actually occupy the attic? I read the book, but I don't remember how.
Yeah, so the time of being hidden was right about 2 years. And then, you know, they were in and out of the attic during that time. If anyone came to the house, everybody had to go to the attic. You know, that kind of thing. There was a very tense time when the neighbors in the front of the house had I believe he was a nephew or a family member that was a Nazi officer, came and lived there on the other side of the wall. So they were in and out through the 2 years. However, the 9 months that the Nazis were actually living in the house, that was the time where there was very little time out of the attic.
Were they actually liberated or?
Shimish was liberated by the Soviets as they came and did their westward sweep through Poland. That would have been 45. Yeah. Well, actually would have been the fall of 44 and then on into 45. Yeah, for the end of the war. Yes.
I wondered, from speaking with the two sisters and, you know, learning their history, especially, I guess, Helena, she was more able to relate her personal experiences. Is that correct?
I would actually say it was the opposite. That Stefania was more able to was more able to express her experiences than Helena was.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Did you gain any kind of insight into maybe their early, you know, their upbringing before this all happened that maybe helped create these kind of heroes?
That's a really good question. So for Zoom, the question is, did I learn anything about the early life of Stefania and Helena that would help us understand how they became such heroes, such strong people that were able to do what they did? And I will say that both girls were very strong in their Catholic faith. They were very religious. Both of them believed that they were doing as God would have them do, and they were both very strong about that. However, the family that they were raised in was not happy with what they did during the war. And, you know, it's very sad to understand, you know, that after the war, and particularly when Stefania married Max, both girls were rejected by their family for saving Jews during the war. They were basically disowned. And, you know, I think this was particularly difficult for Helena, who was a little girl who wanted her mother. And her mother rejected her for helping Stefania do what she did. This was a really lifelong trauma for her. And something that was very difficult for her to talk about. I think when it's hard to describe, meeting Helena is what I can talk about more, since I didn't get to speak with Stefania face to face as herself, but I did read her words. She had written an entire memoir of her memories of her time during the war. It's not something that could probably really be published as it was, but her voice was so strong and her personality was so strong. Both of these girls were the kind of people that knew what they wanted and knew what they should do and knew how to go get it. They were big personalities, they were strong-willed, but both of them had this unshakable belief that what they were doing was right. And it was their job to do what was right, no matter what the danger was to their own lives. And that was something that neither one of them ever wavered from. Yes.
It's important to point out that in Poland, unlike in any other German Nazi occupied country, the punishment for harboring a Jew was death. And yet his sisters risked so much not only for themselves but their families. They are both of them members of the Righteous Among Nations that are in Yad Vashem's, which
Yes.
familiar, there are some 5,800 Poles that are acknowledged as righteous among Gentiles, far more than any other occupied nation during the war. So just want to let's emphasize that it wasn't, while it's such a heroic deed that they did, there are others that were not recognized as such, and there was no collaboration among any members of the Polish government, any Nazi occupiers, even though their sentiments may have existed among individuals. Just wanted to point that out. How
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is very important to realize that both girls were recognized in 1979 by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations. They have also, now that the book has been published in Poland and those places, they are so much more recognized in their own country, where for a long time, what they did was something that they didn't talk about a lot because you didn't know who would reject you for what you had done or who would celebrate you, for what you had done. And I think that was something that was difficult. Of course, Helena lived under a Soviet-controlled Poland for many, many years. And so she was not allowed to travel to receive her commendation from Yad Vashem. She was not allowed to do that. So one of the things that I think has been a wonderful outcome of the book, and this is not directly answering you, but just something I would really love to say, is that Helena did not receive the thanks that her sister did. Stefania moved to the United States. She was able to speak at the opening of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. She stood she and Max stood together on the stage with the Clintons and the Gores and the Prime Minister of Israel, all of these dignitaries, and shared their stories. She was interviewed. She went to Israel to receive her commendation from Yad Vashem. All of these things. Helena really got none of that. And one of the things that this book, I think, accomplished before she passed away was that she got thanked. People sent her letters, they sent her notes, they emailed and said, thank you, and we forwarded those things to her. Another outcome, completely unforeseen of the book, is Ed was contacted by a man who said, I've just read the book and I think the Hirsches, I think that's my grandfather and my great-grandfather. They were Leon and Shunik Hirsch from Shemesh, and I think this is who they are. And so they compared notes, they looked at the family history, and that is who they were. They had no idea they were Jewish, had no idea that they had been hidden. And they had a Zoom meeting with Helena. And it was 30-something people. And all the little windows across the screen, all the descendants that had come from the two people that she saved. And they all said thank you. It was absolutely incredible thing to have happened for her. Yes.
So I'm actually a history teacher in a local school here, and I've noticed past few years, the Holocaust tends to get skipped over or is only taught the very basics in classrooms. Due to, time restraints or, things come up. And I noticed the younger generations tend not to know or understand what the Holocaust actually is. What is something you actually hope the younger generation can gain a better understanding of, especially nowadays, so much anti-Semitism happening all over the news?
Yes, that's a really good question too. She's asking, what do I hope that students today can learn about the Holocaust? And I think for me, it's two things. I think first, it is very, very, very important for us to all understand the human capacity to hurt other humans and the depth to which we can actually fall. Because I think a lot of people, it just seems unbelievable. And maybe that's a small part of why people try to reject the reality of what went on. I think we have to understand that capacity if we're going to stop it. We have to know it's possible. But I think the other flip side of that coin that I hope that all of these stories, like you were saying, all of the Polish heroes that were like Stefania and Helena, that we will never know their names because maybe they were not as lucky and gave their lives for what they were trying to do. There are so many stories and so many heroes that we will never, ever know. What I hope that we can learn is that it is possible to stop. What we do matters. The small things, the big things, it matters. And I think sometimes, kids think, well, my stuff doesn't matter. I'm just this kid going to school. I have nothing to do with all of those things. Well, that's not true. That's not true. I think, we have to understand that the hate that bred the Holocaust did not die with Hitler. We all know that. And so what we do matters. What she did mattered. And the same thing is true for us. There is something to be done. We are not powerless. That's what I would hope.
Do you have any new projects coming up? I'm sure you do.
I do. I have a new book coming out in November. It's one more World War II book. It's called Artifice. This is a book that focuses on Amsterdam and the Dutch resistance. It is based on two true stories. One about a master art forger who was forging vermeers and selling them to the Nazis. And the other is a baby smuggling ring, a group of people who were smuggling Jewish babies out of the deportation center, and they're credited with saving between 600 and 1,000 babies and toddlers. So those are the two true stories. I'm writing about a girl who is selling art forgeries in order to fund this baby smuggling ring, and walking the line between collaborator and resistance. That's coming in November.
Any other questions? So thank you for coming. We thank Sharon for presenting a beautiful story in a beautiful way. If you'd like to purchase the book, if you haven't already read it, and also the more recent book, Bluebird, Talking Leaves Bookstore is here to help you with that. Just see Jonathan, and Sharon will sign your book if you so desire. So they'll both be at that table. And there's also lots of food to eat. And we invite you to look at the Mom, I Don't Want War exhibit that the Polish consulate put together. It's artwork of children post-World War II in Poland and of Ukrainian children today. So it will be actually up in the library gallery, the alumni gallery in the Canisius Library for a couple months. It'll be up during the months of February and March if you want to bring anybody else to see it. But we thought we'd put it up today because hate continues, unfortunately. So, and children are the ones who often suffer the most. So again, thank you for coming and enjoy some time together and some food. And please feel free to buy a book. Thank you.
And I'll figure out how to do this. I don't even- Should be good. Hey, bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye, Zoom people.
Bye, Zoom. Oh, wait, I didn't do it. Now I'll do it. Okay, bye.